Welcome to Lives Beneath History. Amina is a textile weaver whose steady hands draw deep indigo across taut threads beneath the heat of the West African sun. She lives in the 14th century Mali Empire, where caravans move between the savannah and the Sahara, carrying salt, gold, and woven cloth. In a time when distant markets press upon local craft, she works to preserve the standards taught to her by those before her. This is her story. The shuttle struck the packed threads with a dry, steady sound, and Amina leaned forward to press the weft into place with the edge of her thumb. The loom creaked as she shifted her weight. Fine dust rose from the beaten earth floor and settled again in the thin bands of sunlight that cut through the doorway. Outside, she could hear the slow murmur of women at the well and the distant call of a trader urging his donkey forward. Inside the weaving room, there was only the scrape of wood against wood, the faint rasp of thread drawn tight, and the rhythm she had known since she was a child. The indigo threads lay cool and dark across the warp, their color deepened by yesterday's dyeing. She had washed them at dawn, before the heat thickened. Her fingers still held the faint scent of fermented leaves and ash. She paused, studying the pattern. The lines must remain even. The spacing must not drift. A cloth that wavered would shame her teacher's name as well as her own. She lifted her foot to change the shed, guiding the shuttle through again. The thread slid cleanly. She exhaled. The dry season had held longer than expected. Dust clung to everything: the lentils, the water jars, the backs of goats that wandered too close to the compound. It also crept into thread if one was careless. Amina kept her loom covered when she was not working. She swept the floor twice each day. The guild elders said that order in the room showed order in the cloth. A shadow crossed the doorway. She did not look up at once. Visitors often passed by, curious about the work, but few entered without greeting. Amina, her younger cousin Miriam, called softly, "The traders from the north have come again." Amina set the shuttle down and rolled her shoulders. Her back ached in a familiar way. How many? 3 camels this time. And 2 men I have not seen before. Amina nodded. That meant more cloth would be weighed and examined, more bargaining, more pressure. She rose and brushed her palms together, wiping away loose fibers. The woven strip stretched half the length of the loom. It would need another 2 days before it was ready to be cut and joined to others. She ran her hand over the surface once more, checking for snags, then covered it with a light cloth. Outside, the courtyard shimmered with heat. The walls of packed earth glowed pale under the sun. Beyond the compound, she could see the line of camels kneeling, their long necks bent. The traders stood near them, wrapped in loose garments that shielded them from sand and glare. Their skin bore the mark of long journeys. One of them held a bolt of cloth, lifting it so that the light struck its surface. Amina recognized the weave immediately. It was not local. The threads were finer, the pattern less dense. It would fetch a good price among those who wished to display connection to distant markets. Her uncle, who served as a senior member of the Weavers Guild, stood with them. He gestured toward the shaded veranda where bolts of local cloth were stacked. Amina stepped closer, remaining slightly behind him as was proper. The nearest trader inclined his head. "Your cloth holds its color," he said. His speech carried the rounded sounds of lands beyond the desert. In Marrakesh, they asked for deeper blue each year. Amina kept her gaze on the cloth he held. The indigo there was uneven. She wondered if the dye bath had been rushed. "Our dye holds," her uncle replied. "We do not hurry the vat." The trader smiled faintly. "Yet demand grows. If more cloth can be woven, more can be sold. The caravans will not shrink." Amina felt the words settle heavily. Demand grows. They had heard this before. The Mali Empire had flourished under strong rulers. Caravans moved between the savannah and the desert, carrying gold, cola, nuts, salt, and cloth. Amina did not think often of distant courts or armies, but she knew that wealth flowed along the same paths as her woven strips. Cloth traveled north, across the Sahara, into markets she would never see. In return came salt slabs and stories. Her uncle folded his hands. "Our guild sets the pace," he said evenly. "The apprentices must learn fully. A weak cloth dishonors us all." The trader's gaze shifted to Amina. "And you?" he asked. "How many strips can you finish before the next moon?" She measured her answer carefully. "As many as my hands can finish without error." He laughed, though not unkindly. "Error costs silver." "It costs more than silver," she replied before she could stop herself. Her uncle did not rebuke her, but she felt his glance. The trader shrugged. "We will return in 10 days. If more cloth is ready, we will take it." When they moved away to inspect other goods, Amina remained still, watching their figures shrink in the glare. 10 days, she knew what that meant. Longer hours, fewer pauses. Perhaps cutting short the careful rinsing of thread to move faster to the loom. Perhaps reducing the complexity of patterns so that plain bands could be woven quickly. The thoughts unsettled her more than the heat. She returned inside and uncovered her loom. The threads waited without complaint. She sat again, pressing her heel to the Her mother had once told her that weaving was not only the crossing of thread, but the crossing of discipline and patience. Amina had been small then, her legs barely long enough to reach the pedals of the child's practice loom. She remembered how her mother would lean over her shoulder, adjusting her grip. "Feel the tension," her mother had said. "If the warp is too loose, the cloth will sag. If too tight, it will break." Amina tested the tension now. It was even. She let the shuttle fly. The rhythm steadied her thoughts. Each pass required attention. If she hurried, the weft might bunch. If she allowed her mind to wander, the pattern could drift. Outside, voices rose and fell as other artisans worked, leatherworkers scraping hides, metalworkers tapping shapes into form. The guild system bound them together. Each craft had its elders, its apprentices, its rules. Cloth that bore the mark of their quarter carried an assurance of quality. If that assurance weakened, buyers would turn elsewhere. Yet buyers were already arriving in greater numbers. News had spread of wealth along the Niger and beyond. Salt caravans brought not only goods but expectation. By midday, sweat dampened her back. She paused to drink from a calabash, the water warm but welcome. She studied the strip again. The indigo was rich, nearly black in the shadowed threads. It had taken 3 days to prepare the dye bath, properly soaking the indigo leaves, fermenting them in clay vats, adding ash and lime to coax out the color. If she cut that process short, the blue would fade sooner in the sun. She imagined a trader in some distant city unfolding her cloth, watching the color dull after a few months. He would not know her name, but he would know the weakness. Miriam slipped inside, carrying a basket of spun cotton. "They say the caravans grow larger each season," she said. "Perhaps that is good." Amina accepted the basket and began sorting the skeins. "It is good if we remain ourselves." Miriam frowned slightly. "More trade means more coin. We could repair the roof before the rains." Amina did not deny that. The last rainy season had seeped through cracks in the clay. She had laid woven mats across damp spots to protect finished cloth. "We can repair the roof," Amina said. "But not with weak thread." Miriam nodded, though she did not fully understand. She was still an apprentice, her hands not yet hardened to the loom's demands. As afternoon stretched on, Amina's thoughts returned to the trader's question. How many strips before the next moon? She calculated silently. If she rose before dawn and worked until the call to evening prayer, she might finish 2 full strips and begin a third. If she simplified the border pattern, she could complete 3. But the border pattern was not mere decoration. It signaled origin and skill. The interlocking diamonds had been taught to her by her mother, who had learned them from her own teacher. They marked the cloth as belonging to their lineage within the guild. If she replaced them with plain bands, buyers might not object. They might even prefer the lower price. Yet what would the elders say? Her gaze dropped to the floor. The decision would not be hers alone. When the meeting ended, she walked back under the relentless sun. Miriam waited near the loom. What was decided? She asked eagerly. "We will weave more," Amina said, "but not without care." Miriam smiled, perhaps relieved. Amina uncovered her loom once more. The threads lay ready. She considered the border pattern. Perhaps it could be simplified slightly without losing its identity. The interlocking diamonds could be spaced farther apart, with plain bands between. It would save time while retaining the mark of their lineage. She tested the idea on a small section. The result was balanced, though less intricate. She sat back, weighing it. If she adopted this adjustment, she could meet the guild's new expectation and still preserve the dyeing process intact. The color would not suffer. Only the complexity of the border would shift. Would that dishonor her teacher? Or would it show adaptation? She imagined her mother's steady gaze. "Feel the tension," she had said. Balance mattered more than rigid repetition. Amina leaned forward and resumed weaving with the adjusted pattern. The shuttle moved. The loom creaked. Her hands found a new rhythm. As the strip lengthened, she studied the border. It remained recognizable. It remained firm. By the time the traders returned 10 days later, 3 full strips lay folded neatly beside her loom. The blue was deep and even. The borders, though slightly altered, carried the mark of her craft. The trader who had spoken to her before lifted one strip and examined it closely. His fingers traced the pattern. "You have woven more," he observed. "Yes." He held it up to the light. "The border is changed. It is measured," she said. He nodded slowly. "The color holds. It will continue to hold." He smiled faintly. "Then we will take them." As silver changed hands and camels were loaded, Amina felt neither triumph nor relief, only a steady satisfaction. She had not rushed the dye. She had not thinned the thread. She had adjusted where adjustment did not break the whole. When the caravan departed in a cloud of dust, she returned to her loom. The next strip awaited its first pass of the shuttle. She pressed her foot to the treadle and began again, the dry, steady sound filling the room. The demand would not vanish. The caravans would return. But the cloth would remain true, so long as her hands remained disciplined. In the crossing of thread over thread, she found the balance she sought between speed and care, between trade and tradition, between what was asked of her and what she believed must endure. In the chronicles of emperors and caravans, her name is not recorded. The rise of the Mali Empire is told through gold, tribute, and the journeys of rulers. Yet its strength also rested in rooms of packed earth where looms creaked from dawn to dusk. Amina's cloth traveled farther than she ever would, crossing desert and city while she remained beside her dye vats and threads. Her decisions were quiet, measured intention held, and patterns maintained. History remembers the splendor of courts, but it is sustained by the discipline of hands such as hers. In the steady crossing of thread over thread, her work endured beyond the moment of its making. Thank you for listening to Lives Beneath History.